We knew going into it that 2025 was going to be a rough year, but I don't think any of us expected that the very first day of the year would be as horrific as it was, with two attacks of potentially domestic terrorism. In his excellent column, The Borowitz Report, Andy Borowitz wrote the following quote: "In what experts are calling an unprecedented move, on Wednesday, the year 2025 was canceled by popular demand," unquote. I know he was kidding, but I'm sure there are a lot of us out there who wish that's a thing that could actually happen. Check out these clips.
At least 10 people are dead and dozens more injured after city officials say a man intentionally drove a pickup truck into a crowd of people. This happened on the world famous Bourbon Street overnight as people were celebrating the new year. It was around 3:15 in the morning local time. Officials say the man drove around barricades and hurtled down the street in very intentional behavior.
Officials are now investigating whether there is a link between the deadly terror attack in New Orleans and the Tesla Cybertruck explosion that happened outside of Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas.
We are learning from our John Miller that according to multiple law enforcement officers, this person who died in this attack, the driver of the Cybertruck, has a military background.
We're going to get into the potential connections and details of both of these attacks in a second, but I just, want to pause and think about what actually happened and how much fear the victims of these attacks experienced on New Year's Eve. I mean, this is America now, I guess, and I think that doesn't mean we should get inured to it or just take it for granted. Before we dive further in, I just want to take a second and ask you please to like and share this video. Also, please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and click the bell so you'll be sure to be notified anytime new videos drop. Also, if you could give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to the podcast, that would be amazing as well. Okay, so in times like these, right, we want our focus to be on preventing acts of terror like this. We want to be focused on the victims and why these things keep happening in our country. It is vital for leaders under such circumstances to keep us informed, to give us actual verifiable information and unite us before jumping to dangerous conclusions. These kinds of events should be bipartisan, right? So let's take a look at some of the reactions. This was President Biden's response. Quote, "I have been continually briefed on this horrific incident. The FBI is taking the lead in the investigation. My heart goes out to the victims and their families. There is no justification for violence of any kind," unquote. How did Donald respond? By immediately putting himself on the side of anti-immigrant hatred by falsely making the following claims. Quote, "When I said that the criminals coming in are far worse than the criminals we have in our country, that statement was constantly refuted by Democrats and the fake news media, but it turned out to be true. The crime rate in our country is a level that nobody has ever seen before," unquote. Okay. The crime rate is lower than it's been, first of all. Secondly, he didn't even wait to find out who carried out these attacks. He went immediately to his anti-immigrant rhetoric. And of course, he was followed in that by one of his main sycophants, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who wrote, quote, "The FBI has been more interested in tracking down people who protested the election on January 6th than focusing its efforts on our true enemies, terrorists who want to kill Americans, not Americans who want to hold their government accountable," unquote. The fact that this is seditionist, along with many others, is still helping run our government should shame us forever. But not to be outdone, Fox, which continues to be one of the most egregious perpetrators of propaganda and disinformation, ran with this clip.
About the particular truck that was used in this. We know that it was a rental. We know that it was brought from Texas and it was spotted in Eagle Pass, Texas back on November 19th. But We understand that the truck does have a history of plate readers. It never actually passed through from Mexico into Eagle Pass. However, the license plate on this truck has a history of plate readers at the border in patterns, and I'm quoting, that may be suspicious for human smuggling. When this story first broke, a lot of people wanted to know the identity of the suspect. When you hear human smuggling, you think about the border, and the border has obviously been such a dangerous, ignored problem for this country, with so many of these sleeper cells and terrorists who want to harm Americans illegally crossing our borders. What part of that most alarms you?
The part where you are allowed on air to lie continually to the American people. They knew going into that clip that these attacks were not committed by immigrants here legally or otherwise. They were carried out by American citizens, and yet they wanted to make sure their viewers weren't entirely sure about that. And then, of course, we have Senator Foghorn Leghorn, John Kennedy of Louisiana, who took over the microphone by pushing a black woman out of the way so he could ridicule the media and promise to raise fresh hell if the FBI isn't forthcoming with information. Check out this clip.
The federal government is now in charge of this investigation. By that, I mean the White House, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Justice. I have not talked to the FBI. Maybe they've talked to my staff. I don't know. I did talk to the Secretary of Homeland Security a little while ago. And I told him that with all the respect I could muster, that we expect to put the full force and resources of the federal government behind this investigation. Can I say something right quick? Tell me who you're with.
WDSU.
WDSU. Okay, and CBS.
The NBC's over here on the right.
Oh, that's an unusual position.
I don't get it.
You wouldn't.
Yes, in the immediate aftermath of a domestic terrorist attack that killed, as it turns out, 15 people, Kennedy thought it was a good time to mock the media and to pretend that the government led by Joe Biden isn't going to do its job unless people like him hold their feet to the fire. By the way, his good old boy shtick notwithstanding, Kennedy has advanced degrees from the University of Virginia Law School and Oxford University. Later that evening, when we had more facts, Biden set the record straight.
I want to thank you to everyone at the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, including the FBI, for working nonstop to investigate this heinous act. The FBI is leading the investigation to determine what happened, why it happened, whether there was any continuing threat to public safety. Here's what we know so far. The FBI has reported to me the killer was an American citizen, born in Texas. He served in the United States Army on active duty for many years. He also served in the Army Reserve until a few years ago.
Basically, despite all of that, Donald and his ilk still want you to believe that these acts of domestic terrorism were committed by illegal immigrants who were somehow the responsibility of President Biden's failed border policy, none of which is true. After Biden's press conference, Donald had this to say, knowing all the facts we had up until this point. Quote, "Our country is a disaster, a laughingstock all over the world. This is what happens when you have open borders with weak, ineffective, and virtually non-existent leadership. The DOJ, FBI, and Democrat state and local prosecutors have not done their job. They're incompetent, corrupt," unquote. And then today he said this, quote, "With the Biden open borders policy, I said many times during rallies and elsewhere that radical Islamic terrorism will become so bad in America, it will become hard to even imagine or believe Joe Biden is the worst president in the history of America." Actually, the only reason this country is a laughingstock all over the world is because, to our disgrace, we put Donald back into the White House. The truth of the matter is that we have actual data showing that the number of murders committed in this country, as well as other violent crimes, are declining in the United States at a rapid pace. Donald and his Republican acolytes know this full well, They know that these two attacks were perpetuated by American citizens, and yet they use these situations in which American citizens were murdered, essentially, to continue to push their anti-immigrant lies and rhetoric in the hopes of rallying their base and driving them into even more frenzies of terror. So let's take a look at the aforementioned Fox and see what they had to say in light of actual facts.
Donald Trump put out a statement on social media earlier today that reads as follows. When I said that the criminals coming in are far worse than the criminals we have in our country, that statement was constantly refuted by Democrats and the fake news media, but it turned out to be true. The crime rate in our country is at a level that nobody has ever seen before. Our hearts are with all the innocent victims and their loved ones, including the brave officers of the New Orleans Police Department. The Trump administration will fully support the city of New Orleans as they investigate and recover from this act of pure evil. Now, the former president said criminals coming in a statement, meaning into our country. But to be clear, Molly and Brian, the suspect was born in the United States. He served in the United States Army. He was a veteran. The FBI is the lead agency in this investigation, going through the social media and any other accounts associated with the suspect.
All right. Well, hopefully Fox and other propaganda outlets will continue to fact check Donald. I'm not holding my breath, but in perpetuating the lies he does, in engaging in his anti-immigrant rhetoric and hatred, Donald just makes it very difficult to focus on what needs to be focused on. And that is why these things happen and what happens to the people who are actually victimized. This is Simone Sanders with a quite good summary of that sentiment.
It's very important that we always remember that there are people at the center of every single story we are telling, the center of every single news story, at the center of every single controversy. These terrible, senseless acts of violence, they affect real people. And in this particular day and age in our politics, I think it is very easy to get caught up in the back and forth, if you will, the remarks that President-elect Trump made on his social media site, where he incorrectly identified the shooter as an immigrant. Right? It's really easy to get mired down in the politics, but always we must take a step back and remember that there are children who are going to grow up without their mothers and fathers. There are parents who are missing their sons and daughters. There are friends and family members who are now grieving and don't know what to do with all of these feelings. There are first responders who are now questioning, could we have done a little bit more to maybe save another life? There are people who survived the attack, whom were with people who did not come home, who are grappling with why them. So we need to just take a step back and I think give each other a little grace and remember that there are always people at the center of every single one of these stories.
I think it's really important to remember also that this is political for one reason and one reason only, because Donald and the rest of the Islamophobic, racist, anti-immigrant bigots that comprise the Republican Party made it political. This is an ongoing story. We will keep you posted. Thanks.